Hello, I'm Tony Lang from Toronto. This is June 19th, 2016. We're here at the 20th International Congress of Movement Disorders in Berlin, Germany. And it's my great pleasure to have been asked to interview for the archives Professor Kailash Bhatia. We have a standard set of questions we usually have to run through, but we often stray from them for this purpose. And I have the pleasure of having known Professor Bhatia for many years, and some of our best times have been spent with Kailash telling me stories of his background and his history. So I'm really looking forward to him sharing some of these with you today. So we're going to start, Kailash. Welcome. I'm delighted to be doing this with you. And so the first question relates to your early years, your development, your education, and then get us into how you got interested in medicine and neuroscience.
So before I come to that, Tony, I think it's a real honor and privilege for me that I'm being interviewed by you. You're one of my great role models, as you know. And I'm thankful to the International Movement Disorder Society for giving me this interview. As far as my background is concerned, I came from Mumbai, from India, as you're aware. And I finished my medical training in neurology at the Grant Medical College in Mumbai. And at the end of my basic medical education, I was a bit lost. I didn't really know which way I wanted to go. And then I met up with, and I came to know Professor Kailash Bhatia, who used to give these wonderful lectures in neurology, and I happened to go for one of them, and I was hooked on to neurology, and he was absolutely
So he was
amazing.
number one mentor, and
He was the one who really got me aware, actually, of the field of neurology, and how he said that this was one area where you would use your brain and you could come to a diagnosis using your examination skills and so on. And he was an astute clinician, and also he had a research bent. So when I finished my DM neurology training, he had retired and he was in a private hospital. And most people would have, at that time, started practice. But I felt that I was not complete somehow. And I went to him and I asked him, can I work with you, do some research? And he asked me, why do you want to do research? And I said, actually, I don't know. I just feel that I should do something more than just start practice. So he took me.
you're about how old at this time?
I was about 29, also 29, 30.
Yep.
And he took me under his wing, and he asked me to do a project on the Parsis, which is a clan in India who had come from Zoroastrians, as they're known. And he said, I have a project for you. It's, do the Parsis have more MS, multiple sclerosis? And I knew nothing about MS or about the Parsis or about how to do a research project. So we started doing something, and I wrote around to people. I wrote to Kurtzky and asked him how would one do this study. And eventually, to make long story short, we wrote a paper, and he asked me to send it to Neurology India, and I said, I think I've done a good study. Can I send it to the Annals of Neurology? And he said, well, Annals of Neurology, it won't get many papers accepted from India in the Annals of Neurology, so okay. Anyhow, luckily that was accepted, and he called me and he said, I think you should go abroad. And where would I go? I said, I'm a middle class. My parents are, I had no plans of going abroad. But at that time, Anita Harding was visiting India, and Kailash Bhatia was interested in spinocerebellar ataxias. And he had this particular entity called Wadia-Swamy syndrome, just SCAR2, standard SCAR2. Mm-hmm. And he asked me whether I'd like to go and do some work with Anita and do something on cerebral ataxias. And that was also by chance that I met Anita, because she was going on a trek to the Himalayas, and I used to go trekking. and her trek got cancelled. She was going to Kashmir. And Bhatia asked me to go and meet her and give her an alternative route. And I remember going to Anita in this hotel in New Delhi, and she had this map, and I pointed out to her where I was going and where she should go. And she asked me, "Are you a neurologist?" Dr. Bhatia says good things about you. And I said, yes. And she enjoyed her trek, and then she came back, and an opportunity arose that I could go on this double sponsorship to Queen Square. And that's how I came to England. And that's how I bumped into David Marsden, who was then, of course, my main mentor. It was a very, very interesting, actually, event. I had no money because I was on a very small scholarship, and I heard that there was a professor who was doing these rounds where he would have sandwiches, free sandwiches. So I thought, oh, okay, so might as well go and have a sandwich and listen to what this professor was saying. And what I didn't know, that there was a particular rule or hierarchy. So he had this table where he would be sitting at the head of the table, and the sandwiches are there in front of him, and he had the senior registrar and other people and the research fellows sitting around. But you couldn't eat the sandwich unless he ate the first sandwich. So it had a little cellophane thing. He would open it, and then he would take the first sandwich about 15-20 minutes after the round had started, and then others could dig in. So I came a bit late, and as I walked by, I opened the thing and I stole a sandwich. And
the eyes are all buggy.
Yeah, he looked at me, and I took a seat. And anyway, so the next case they were discussing, I asked a question, which was again something you didn't do until you know.
The hierarchy.
The hierarchy. Yeah. So he asked me who I was, and I told him who I was, and he said, you have a paper in the Annals of Neurology, which had just come out. So, and he asked me a number of questions, and we had a bit of a argument, and unfortunately I was reasonably okay. And so the next week I was doing my lab work in Anita's lab, and the senior registrar comes and says, Professor Marsden would like your company for
rounds and sandwiches.
The book round. And I said, well, actually, I'm doing my PCR. I've just started and I can't come. So this chap says to me, if I were you, I would go for the round. So I said, well, no, actually, but seriously, I can't come. So that was a bit of a fuss. And
so you didn't go to the rounds that time?
That day I didn't go.
Yep.
But from then on, I was asked or advised by Anita that I would go for these
Professor
rounds.
has called you.
You have to go.
You go.
So I would go on his book round, I would go for his ward round, and so on. That's how we got to know each other. And when I finished my term with Anita, he asked me, would you like to work with me in movement disorders? And by now I had become very interested in movement disorders. I thought it was really fascinating. And David, as you know, and you worked with him, was absolutely fascinating. So I got hooked onto movement disorders. And 3 years later, I finished my fellowship. I became a lecturer. And I told him I'm going home. And he said, no, you should stay here. So after a bit of debate, I became the first Indian-trained senior lecturer and neurologist at Queen Square. And subsequently, he died in '98, and then I carried on, and I became a professor in 2002. So that's my story.
So the poor Indian brought through the ranks with a lot of accident, and
yeah.
So had Anita not been doing a visiting professorship in India, you'd never have landed in England.
Who knows?
Yeah, really.
These are all little chances in life. You meet people and things happen and so on. And I remember even with David, the thing which really triggered this was after a few weeks when we went there was a case admitted to the intensive care, and he had come to, and I was with him, and they were talking about brainstem encephalitis, and this guy had facial grimacing and jerks of his face, and I said, has anybody done a spatula test? And he turned around to me and he said, what's that for? And I said, well, I just wonder if because I come from India, I wonder if he's got cephalic tetanus. So he said, get a spatula and put it in and bang. So that's what he's got. I don't think he's got brainstem encephalitis. He's got cephalic tetanus. And turned out this guy was
clamped on the spatula.
On the spatula.
Right.
These are some old tests which we forget in the West, but
probably didn't know in the West.
Yeah, and that really for him was, some of these things which happened by chance led his attention to me, and and he gave me, while I was his fellow, he loaded me with things to do, and we managed to do them, and it was great. It was one of the best times in my life.
So you've answered one of the questions about role models in your field, and that's pretty obvious that...
Yes, I think it was clearly Anita, P.K. Thomas, Marsden, David at that time. There were big luminaries there. And we heard of other people as well, Stan Farn, since you got in the movement disorder. I remember my first this with you, in fact. It was actually when you wrote that paper, the Causalgia dystonia syndrome, which was one of my first papers in brain, and you got up in one meeting and asked me if they are psychogenic or functional. And I said, I didn't know who you were. So I think I said something, and Marsden told me that was Tony Lang, and I said, oh, okay. So,
and that field has changed considerably since that time.
It did.
So you've had an incredible career and continue to have a incredible career. That's the one thing about these interviews. It's almost as if it suggests that it's gone the downswing, but you're continuing to rise. It's a tough question to ask an individual who's been working like you have, but what do you think your most important contributions to the field have been to date?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, it's a difficult question to answer. I think I see myself as a clinical academic who has a little bent for translational work, sort of combining genetics, electrophysiology, etc. So when I came to Queen Square, and this was something which David was doing with Anita and with John Rothwell and a very strong electrophysiology team at Queen Square. And I think I would divide my career into sort of bits and pieces of areas of interest which I had over periods of time. So if you ask me, is there a single contribution to which I've done, I'd struggle to say, okay, this is what I did. And I don't think I still see that my career is developing, and I don't know. I think there are many small little things which I've done in my life. So for example, I have a big interest in the field of dystonias, and I did a lot of work in looking at these manifesting, non-manifesting carriers. One of the first, we're one of the first to sort of point that out, talking about that even the non-manifesting people have changes in the brain. I think that was an important landmark thing at that time, at least. A number of new genetic conditions which have come about because of the careful observation and which we did over a period of time in dystonia and choreas in a variety of other fields. And the electrophysiology as well, and I wouldn't call myself an electrophysiologist at all, but I think I realized that over there, especially after Marsden passed away, that it was incumbent upon me and others to give some direction to our specialized electrophysiologists. And I think that I fitted that role quite well. I had the answers to ask of them, and they would try and provide the answers. And that thing worked very well. The next sort of, I think, area is tremor, which I think I realized for a long time that tremor was quite a messy area. I mean, we're still struggling with it, but I think there have been some directions, particularly with essential tremor or water condition which look like that. We got a new task force, and I'm pleased to tell you that we've today agreed
My goodness.
it
There's
was
agreement in the
big.
field, is there?
Yeah, there's an agreement, and there's going to be a new consensus paper on that. I think that's important. This little area of SWEDS, which came in for a while, I thought that was quite interesting. We were one of the first to point out that there are these people who have these tremors which look like Parkinsonian tremors but turn out to be something else. And in between, I think what I get pleased with is that I point out certain clinical syndromes or clinical entities or clinical signs which help people in the field realize or lead them to the diagnosis. And I think that I would consider perhaps my biggest contribution, a way of thinking, a way of organizing in this field of movement disorders. And even though genetics has come and there are many phenotypes and genotypes overlapping, etc., this way of being able to deal with an individual patient, I mean, you can know hundreds of genes, but you don't know how to apply that when it comes to, now there are very few of us, I think, now left with that sort of, and I've learned from you and from Marsden and others how to apply this and also how to teach this application to others. So I think that would be my main sort of, and I never pretend that I do anything different. That's what I enjoy doing, and I think I'll probably continue doing that. These little clinical gems make me very happy.
Well, I'd agree. I see you as one of the most brilliant clinicians we have in the field, but it's not enough just to be good clinically. You ask the right questions, you're an outstanding collaborator, so you can direct those questions to the electrophysiologist, the geneticist, or whatever. You're capable of being very critical about the results that they provide you, and I think the contributions you've made in those fields are just, they're outstanding. What about the scientific challenges? What do you see as some of the greatest challenges you've had in the science you've been doing and in our field?
Well, as you know, I was an outsider, and I still, to some extent, am an outsider too. And, you know, the way I think movement disorders and perhaps science or neurology and science is getting more and more difficult for clinical academics, for clinicians. And I think that's a bit of a shame, I believe. People are getting very restrictive in their research areas, so they cannot see the bigger picture at times. And you need people to be able to direct the bigger picture. So you can have people who are in various things and are being able to be, so somebody who can see, may not know necessarily, may not be an expert in a particular area, but can see the bigger vision in that area and is able to have people or others, or direct the field at least. And I think this is something which I would really would like to do in a bigger way than I've been able to do. And I feel that that's been a bit of a regret for me, that I've not had the chance in a way, or maybe I haven't developed that chance to do it in a bigger way that I would like to. The field is advancing rapidly, and obviously you need these super specialists in these particular domains, particular areas, but you also need people who are able to see the bigger picture. And I sort of see myself as the latter, where I can perhaps get people together to work together towards common goals. And sometimes that's been difficult.
What do you see as the biggest hurdles to continuing to allow the development of people that can see the forest for the trees, that really can look at the bigger picture and help develop the field? Are there restrictions in funding or restrictions in other aspects that will make this a dying breed, or do you think that the future is possible and bright?
I think there are cycles in academia, you know, so there are periods of time where science sort of becomes overwhelming. Then people say, I think, for example, in Germany, if you see, there's a period of time where everything was very investigative and they'd almost forgotten their clinical science. And then they realize that they have actually become very poor clinicians. And now there's a sort of a trend to get people come back into clinics and so on. So I think the same thing happens in this. We have you had times of splitting and lumping all along. So at the moment, everything's very sort of scientific. All the money goes to the basic scientists. The clinical academics are suffering. Everybody talks about the genes taking over, and why do we need a clinician? We can order a panel, and we can do exome sequencing. We can do whole genome sequencing, and then you get this whole host of results, and then you don't know what to make of them, right? And that's again where the clinical academics come in. So I think it's funding. It's the way the people who make the decisions look at things. So at this time, clinicians are a bit lower on the ranks with regard funding and so on. But I think we have to work together.
So where do you think our field is headed? Where do you think we're going right now, next 5 years or so?
I think we are at a terrific crossroad at the moment. It's just amazing. I mean, to me, I was just attending some of these lectures here and also recently at the European Academy. And if you see the way the field is going, I mean, if you think about Parkinson's itself, when we are talking about, not too long ago, we were talking about all the symptomatic drugs and how do we improve this and delivery of the levodopa and dopamine agonists, et cetera, and then there's sort of a sea change where we are talking about vaccines and immune modifying treatments and so on. And I think we are going to see a remarkable new developments in this area. We're going to move away from our conventional strategies because the breakthroughs which have happened, driven by the genetics and the pathophysiological mechanisms, a complete sea change in how we're going to be looking at these things. Multiple drug treatments, multiple, not just drug, but multiple types of therapies, where you may have a mixture of this and that some of them are going to be quite innovative. You may be mixing up DBS with drugs or other things. Sorry, not DBS, just stereotactic surgery. So I think we are really at a landmark era. 5 years from now, we'll be giving completely different lectures on the treatment of Parkinson's, I think.
So recognizing the changing landscape, what are you telling young doctors that are getting interested in the field? How are you advising them? What are you telling them to do?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult time for young doctors. So on one hand, we expect them to have this sort of clinical expertise, which I was just mentioning to you earlier, and lamenting that that's being lost. At the same time, I feel that the young doctors also need to develop a particular niche area. So they may be an expert on imaging, for example. They may be an expert on immune modifying treatment. They may be an expert on some area or the other. It's just not enough now in this day and age to be restricted to being a clinical. You have to develop a particular niche area if you're going to go into research, and this is very difficult. And there's a lot of competition. There's a very easy way that you just become a clinician and earn money in the private sector and so on, and that can be possible. So I think the clinical academic people are going to find it quite tough, and we have to motivate them. We have to make them look at this picture. And I've been very lucky. I've had a huge number of very talented, very capable young people whom I've shown or asked them the right questions, shown them, and they have produced, and they are the leaders. And I really now look at them, and I get very happy with how they are all doing. I've been very fortunate, I must say. Tonight we are going to have my fellows are arranging a dinner for me, and there are going to be about 25 of them, and each and every one of them has become
your list is outstanding. It really is quite something.
So I think, yes, there is still a possibility of encouraging and bringing forward capable young people, and they are our future, really. But it is tough. The field is tough. I've seen some number of people give up. We got to help them to continue in the area. And I see that it is possible.
So if you could turn the clock back 20 years, the young man from Mumbai, would you do anything differently?
It's a difficult one. I mean, on one hand, I would say that I've been very fortunate to be where I've reached, and I'm happy with what I've done. But I still feel that there is more I can continue doing in the future. If I had to go back 20 years, would I have done something different? You know, I might have thought of developing some, like I was just telling you, about a niche area, perhaps. Maybe in addition to doing the clinical, this to have something which I could have done. I'd always
Do you think you could have covered the field as broadly and successfully had you expended a large effort on a single niche area? It's interesting.
It would be difficult, I would imagine. But I was always interested in pathology, actually. At one time in my life, I wondered about being a pathologist. Very, very different from what you might have imagined. But and I still think that maybe if I went back 20 years and if I had access to dabble in a little bit of neuropathology combined with I might have done that.
Interesting. Now you've accomplished so much and written, I'd hate to think of how many papers and been teaching and lecturing. How do you manage a decent work-life balance, or is there such a thing in Kailash Bhatia's life?
It's probably a question you need to ask Nina, my wife. But I think there have been periods of time in my life where I've really, really struggled in that regard, particularly when I was writing Marsden's book of movement disorders.
You might tell the audience a little bit about that experience.
So this was a very large volume which has just been published 3 years ago. And it was a book which David Marsden had been attempting to write with Ivan Donaldson from New Zealand. And somehow towards around 97 or so, he asked me to join in. And then, of course, he passed away in 98, and we never sort of got started on that. But he sort of took it as a tacit agreement, and he had mentioned that to Oxford University Press, and around 2000, 2002, they asked me if I would do this. And in the beginning, I thought it's 52 chapters. I can just update them and do them. It's only when I started I realized the enormity of the thing. And he still had bromocriptine. There was no DYT1. The gene, there's nothing. I mean, it was very good what was written, but it wasn't. It was really behind. I mean, the last update was around 94, and we were now in 2002. So, whole thing really had to be revamped. And I worked alone, single-handedly, for 9 years on that. Every night, every one day of the weekend, the agreement with Nina that Saturday I could work on the book. And post dinner, and I carried on.
For 9 years.
9 years.
People don't appreciate the work that's put into that kind of piece.
But if you see, if anybody's actually
it's magnificent.
Pick up the book and read it, you'll realize that this is not just like any other book. It's like, I would say, the book. And it was wonderful to have all of Marsden's stuff in there and then update it and actually go back and find out what happened. So you would have written, for example, this family by so-and-so. And I had to chase up and see what happened to that family. Was it published? What happened to this? What happened to this? Whatever he had written. And it was a challenge. It was really a challenge. But I learned a lot. It was a learning experience. So, yes, so that was a time where I think I really put in a big effort. And it got finished with the help of Susan Schneider and so on. But we wrote it up. It's published. It's there. And I think that's one of my big, if you were asking me earlier and I forgot to mention that, I think that is one of my big achievements too, putting that book into press. Since then I've been editor of MDCP. Another thing which we started from scratch, and I was the co-founding editor, and that's been a great experience. You've been an editor, so you know how it is, and that's been occupying my time trying to improve it.
So you're avoiding the life-work balance
Yes.
question here.
So I'm coming back to that. Since I've had my daughter grow up, I've got one daughter, Nikita, I've learned this of balancing, life. So now, for example, in the last year and again this year, for the first time in my life, I'm going for a proper holiday. I haven't had a holiday in the last 10 years. And so I go for meeting, conference, but I haven't had 10 days off or 2 weeks off. So we had one last year. I'm going this year to Cuba. So I'm trying to balance this, but it's difficult. I get a bit edgy if I don't have my laptop or my BlackBerry with me.
I guess the critical issue here, and I experience this as well, is we love what we do.
Yes.
We're addicted to what we do.
We are
but
addicted.
It's still very important to recognize that we can't do it without the family, and it sounds like that's a very important component of your life.
So the older I'm getting, I think
wiser you're getting.
I'm trying to do this more and more to spend more time with them. But they move on as well, so they've grown up and they have their own lives, and that makes it difficult too. So it's a struggle to manage this, and I'm sure you.
Very much.
Yeah.
So through the course of your career and development and mine, the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society, previously the Movement Disorder Society, has played a fairly substantial role. Can you give me your sense of the role the MDS has played in your development and in the field?
Yeah, I think I consider the MDS almost like a family. It's really a family. It's a place where it's an organization which brings in like-minded and good people, and it supports the upcoming and education, and also brings them to prominence. And I can say that for myself. So, I came as a research fellow. I was given the chance to speak at the MDS forums, to take part in those forums. I was in the committees. I met people like yourself and others who have been, in the forefront of the International Movement Disorder Society, who have been extremely, really been amazing in supporting, nurturing young talent, and I can see that happening even now. So I think it's a fantastic forum. It's an amazing society, really successful in this regard, both for the education, forming new leaders, but also as a public face of movement disorders. So I think this people can come to I would say that the MDS is like a model society of what scientific societies should be, and clinical societies. It's really a model. So I'm really pleased with that, and being being in this society and being nurtured by it, and now at a more of a leadership role, trying to foster and do the same for the others, which was done to me.
Did you, over the course of your career development, obviously you didn't get it from the society. I think they, as you say, nurture and help. But did you face any bias or barriers in your career development that you had to overcome?
Again, it's I must say that there's always been this thing about your color and your background, where it came from India to the UK, and as you know, the UK is slightly can be slightly tricky for people from other backgrounds. But I must say, I must give the credit also, on the other hand, to say that people have accepted me and allowed me to flourish and to grow. There are obviously always hurdles in everybody's life, wherever you come from, and one has to face the hurdles and look at these. I always look at the glass, which is, the part of, not the empty part, but the glass which is full. I always do that. I'm always an optimistic person, and I think we can get along with people and achieve what you got to do. I don't think there are real barriers in life.
I think, from my experience with you, if there were any question about a barrier, you open your mouth and you realize the substance behind what you're saying. So it's, if there was any question before you started to speak, you've answered it fairly quickly. Do you think that young people in our field are facing new barriers, and what kind of new challenges or different challenges do you think our young colleagues, as we're bringing them up through the LEAPS program and other development programs, what are they facing that maybe we didn't?
Yeah, I think the LEAP program is a good measure, and I'm one of the LEAP mentors, and a number of people in the first LEAP program are actually my previous fellows, Susan Schneider, Maria Stamelu, and so on. So I think it's an excellent program. The youngsters face the barriers which we also faced when we were young. There are always established people in the field, and obviously these people are the ones who would be dominating various forums and so on. And when you were young, you always had this thing that, well, no, I can do that too. If I was given the chance, I can present that. And what we are doing here with the LEAP program is to give these people a chance to express that, and I think that's wonderful. People will face barriers, and the field is expanding so much. It can be overwhelming, I think, for the youngsters when they are starting off, to see how it is. And I think it's imperative upon us to make them feel secure, make them feel that we went through all this, and help them achieve their goals. And I think that's what we've been trying to do, I think, through the MDS and through the LEAP program. I think it's a wonderful program. It's really good.
So we've sort of coming close to the end of this interview. Are there any issues or experiences or aspects of your career that you'd like to share that we didn't get around to talking about? I know you've told me endless wonderful stories, but anything specific or special that you'd like to share?
Well, I think, during this time I've met several people who have influenced me, who helped me. Marsden I mentioned, but I think at Queen's Court at that time, Neil Quinn is another colleague of mine I certainly would mention. He's wonderful. We've been great friends. I think when David passed away, both of us were floundering a bit in that, and I think that drew us even together even further. Neil is wonderful, great clinician, great friend. There were so many people at the Square at that time, but even outside that, I've shared great moments with you. You've been one of my idols, Kapil Sethi, and I think the MDS has provided us this forum where we can meet like-minded people, where we can meet others. We banter, we fool around, we compete, and yet we go ahead and we achieve, and we appreciate each other's disagree. Disagreement is a very important part of science, and I think it's extremely important to keep that. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate to have extremely good friends in the field, people whom I respect and people who respect me, and I think that's wonderful. I couldn't ask for more.
Well, I think that's a nice way of ending our discussion. Kailash, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to have been asked to interview you. We're both long-standing friends, and this is sort of one of those wonderful experiences in the road of our friendship. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you.